So I appreciate Sheila. Meow meow. Okay. Um, I'm sure I can say it. You can either do a color and you can it's like our yeah, so like next year I'm doing and did you mind like first like into the shuttle flying those carbon. Yeah, love flying. Yeah, first no. Go back. Go back, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was stuck there for a while. Like yes and no, because we were stuck with family. Yeah. No, I was talking about with the captain. No, yeah, that's yeah. No, it was like, yeah, so, still within the disorder, it was like, so, yeah. I kind of want, I would just, no, we didn't look now, but I'm kind of like,
Thursday to Friday.
some room where if it's done, I'm not.
Well, yeah. We need to like hard to think, you know what I'm saying?
No, when I just I reached it, and then yesterday, where it's 30, like, 30, falling. Thursday, yeah. You're back when we were like five. We were back, in O'Hare, but we were like walking the entire airport just to get to work first. So then our Uber took an hour.
Oh.
So I'm like, I don't, that's the way I can make it to class. I spent like walking through like through the entire airport, and then we have to go through like two parts of like security or something. Yeah. I got it. And then like I got like briefly post profile. Yeah. Yeah, something like that. And I was like, I'm sorry. Like I'm Filipino. So funny. Because they're like, they asked me, where do you come from? And I was so tired. I was like, hey, hi everyone. And like that's where my chest.
How are we doing today? No, it's a little bit my favorite. Okay. Well, we're going to be talking today about Black system. Around week 7. Almost halfway. Today, these are our journal objectives. We're going to define the terms of usual and resistance of anti-blackness. We're going to describe the narrative, discuss in chapter 5. The truth about African Americans for the 20th century. Hi, don't forget your name. Describe how textbooks and curriculums have been served to useful race making, and describe the context of African American. Here's what we're gonna be doing. We're gonna do like quick blog talking. We're gonna talk about the critical reading reflection essay you have in class next week. In the beginning, so that you can ask all the questions and we don't feel rushed by time in the class. And we'll have like a lecture slash discussion. We'll bring in some topics from last week when we were but this week's reading. And then if there's time, hopefully there's already reflecting and I can always include that or use that as a draft in your photo essay autobiography. And then we're gonna talk about the announcement dynamic. Sounds good? You're gonna need your phone for this. I'll open it up once y'all. So we're gonna create a work. I want to see what you are thinking about that experience and how that was for you. Sorry, though. So how would you describe your community walk? Do we need more, we need the QR code again? How would you describe your community walk experience? Is in one word describe? Anyone else with the QR code again? That's all. That's okay to be honest. Fun, enjoyable, relaxing, peaceful, informative, knowledgeable, engaging, and official. Anyone want to share like a highlight of the community walk? How it helps them think about their practices.
The neighborhood that I went to, I actually spent a lot of time with the child being there. And I used to have a lot of neighborhoods that I would frequent as a child.
Mhm.
And then as I got older, I realized one thing that I was here, like 4 minutes from. I just,
That's part of the. Kind of going back and perspective. And you can definitely think about that, your, photo I care about, talking about that, make those connections. Anything else, Lauren? Yes, Liz?
I kind of had a similar experience. I grew up with the area that I did my play in. But it's definitely diversified a lot, just even in a couple of years since then. So just seeing that was really cool.
Yeah, how like it still has many similar aspects, but it's also like expanded your view. Any other books ready to share? Okay. That's Mentimeter. If you ever want to use it with your students, maybe you already know how to use it. Okay, so your critical reading section essay. Cool. So these little images to remind y'all is no computers, no phones for our essay. And I think also we don't need our computers and phones anymore. Okay, we're really present. So you will write your essay in class next Monday. You'll get one of these blue books. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. What else? I can see some of it. It's gonna be open notes, open articles, open reading engagement responses. So you want to just print them out, you know. You will get an essay prompt and a blue book. Everybody gets the same essay prompt. I was debating between giving you like 3 and having you decide, but I think that might just create more anxiety. So I'll just give you 1. And then, and the essay prompt, we'll get into it, but it's not like a right or wrong answer. It's about what you're thinking, right? That's why it's a critical reading engagement. Or I mean, a critical reading reflection. Please use a black pen, a dark blue pen, or a pencil, right? So make sure you bring that with you. Write legibly, as legibly as you can. You will all be teachers, so at some point you will have to write, on the board or write to your students, feedback, grade things. We will start promptly at 4:15, so make sure you're around on time. And you will have 90 minutes to write your essay. There are no makeup dates if you don't attend class on Monday, unless there's like extreme emergency, something have to like explain to me and they're not going to speak. So if you go to D12, under content, you'll see assignment guidelines, and I already have these visible for y'all. Critical reinflection essay, and then preparing for your essay exam. It's a handout I just put together. This is the handout. Can you all see it, or let me open it and just zoom in so that. So I just made a quick list for you all of the topic for the week and the readings. Here I gave you the intent citation, so that, you're not confused. That's why I was kind of telling you, make sure you cite your things, otherwise you won't be able to know who said what. So those are the weeks, only week 2 to week 7. We're not including week 8. Make sure to organize, Diana. Make sure to organize all of your readings before you start studying. Since you're allowed to use notes, make annotations, make margin notes, however you organize yourselves, whatever's easier. Some people like to have more things, some people like to have less things. Up to you. Draw connections between the author's arguments and course themes. Mind mapping is helpful when you write a word and start connecting things and put authors next to each bubble that you create. Yeah, go back to your notes. Maybe form a little study group if you have that, have conversations. How are authors' arguments similar or different? How are the course themes relevant to understanding culture and responsive teaching and pedagogy? And then here I just gave you some terms that we talked about from week 2 to week 7. Just to have an idea what they are. And if you don't understand one of these, reach out to me, go to your notes, kind of start thinking about all of this stuff if you don't, if some of them seem confusing. And then engaging critical thinking and reflection. And what do I mean by that? It's asking yourself, what do you think about the course topics in relation to being a research teacher? How are course themes or topics helping you shape your understanding of culturally responsive teaching? What have course readings and topics made you reflect about in relation to your own identity and schooling experiences? And what do you agree or disagree with? What questions do you still have about course topics, themes, and content? And yes, strategies is a big question, right? But I would say even within big ideas, right? That we've been talking about specifically to reading and themes we've been talking about. And kind of think about, who are you as a writer? How do you write? Are you the type that just kind of starts writing? Are you the type that needs to make an outline? Are you the type that kind of needs to decide what you're going to talk about in each paragraph? So before you, come on Monday, think about are you really going to develop an outline? It's going to be very simple, intro, body, conclusion. What is your thesis statement or your argument, right? And making sure that you have the evidence to support those arguments or those claims you're making. What is the thesis statement? A thesis statement is an assertion backed by evidence, your course reading. Remember to keep your argument simple and to the point. The professor, I don't have to agree with you, but you just need to be clear and you need to have, the reading as well. Okay. Create main points. So for the body, right? Or maybe just say the main point in your introduction and then the body go 1, 2, 3 for your point. This is a very generic way to write it. There's other ways. Jot down a number of points that will serve as the basis of your responses. Try to organize your points in a coherent manner. One point should flow into the other, right? You shouldn't just go from one paragraph to something else and there's no translation. And yeah, just brainstorm supporting evidence. What readings are you going to talk about? What can be personal experiences or experiences with the students you work with you want to include. And then on the day of class, make sure you read the instructions carefully. Make sure you ask, clarifying questions that you have them. You can answer them. Don't feel like you can't ask. And take out the key terms in the essay prompt question, right? I might say something around discuss, explain, illustrate, outline, or summarize. And here's what I mean by those. Okay, you have an idea what that means. So some quick checklist guidelines. I didn't create a rubric for this because everybody is a different place. Right? Everybody thinks about their writing differently, and everybody's going to talk about things in their own way. And this is more of a checklist on if you have these things, you should be fine, right? You should be good. So your writing must be legible. use a black pen, dark blue pen, or pencil. And you have 90 minutes. Don't worry so much about grammar, right? Grammar is important, but this is like uh, writing experience where grammar isn't like the priority. Don't get stuck on like, should I say it this way or that way? I won't take off points for grammar, grammatical errors. But remember to capitalize letters after period, spaces and all that. Make sure to use in-text citations, APA style, when referring to a reading or argument an author made. So some of you sometimes say like in the so and you give me the title of the reading. You don't have to do that. You can just say Laxton Billing said blank, and I agree with this, right? You can do that, but that's just like taking up time and space for you. You're gonna do it. It's just a tip. If you like doing that, you can still keep doing it. The essay isn't about saying things in the right way or writing what you think I want to hear. The essay is about highlighting your understanding of the course, readings, concepts, and theories, and how you are thinking about them in relation to cultural responses. That makes sense? So technically, everyone can like get 100 points or 100%, as long as you're doing that. Okay. Typical structure is 5 paragraphs: introduction, 3 body paragraphs, 1 conclusion paragraph. This is just for those that need structure. Some of you I just follow different structure. That's okay. There are many ways to write a paper, but this is, your go-to if you're like, how do I write it? If you're already like a writer who feels confident how you go about things, keep doing that. There is no minimum word count requirement. Focus on making sure you have a clear thesis statement, argument, and that you cite course readings or materials to support your arguments or specific themes and topics you are addressing. So and that doesn't mean just summarizing what the author said. It means like engaging with what they said and how you're thinking about it, okay? Or how do you see what Laxton Billing says compared to what Tuck said, right? And what's the culminating theme and how does that speak to what you're thinking? You may also include examples from your own experiences in schools or learning spaces, things that are personal that you feel comfortable sharing with me, or things that have happened that you've observed working with children and youth, or other stories that have been passed on to you. We can't be learning about storytelling and oral stories if we can include our own personal experiences, right? But don't make the whole paper, right? Like make sure you're also including what authors are saying, right? And what they're arguing and that it all ties together. You are required though to include and cite at least 3 readings, at least, okay? Assigned between week 2 and week 7 in your essay. Just naming the article or summarizing the article won't suffice. That won't be enough. So make sure you engage with the readings, like, take a critical stance and state what the authors are arguing, your opinion or perspective, and how you are connecting the readings to each other. Sounds good? And that's pretty much it. Any questions about our essay for next week? Sorry, let me.
Okay.
Are we gonna have class after or we release? This is society. Be here. Like, oh, I know.
It's like get a snack.
We will continue to talk about the religion. I'm pretty sad.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I was trying to like that. And like,
We'll take like if you're done and it's 70 minutes in, you can like take a break as long as you're back. And if you're done at the 90-minute mark, we'll still have a break, short break. But then we will talk about some of the concepts for the week, just because I don't want to take it for after spring break and then it's just further. Any other questions? I don't know if you noticed, for next week. Week 8. So we're gonna be talking about segregation policy and structural racism. You have these 2 readings, but I decided to not include a reading engagement for next Sunday, just to give you, more time to study, to not stress you out. That doesn't mean you shouldn't read them if you don't have a chance to read them for Monday. That's okay, but you should still read them because they'll show up for the next essay that we have later on. Okay, it doesn't mean like you get to ignore these readings, but they're there. I'll talk about them or about the concepts in class, but you don't have to submit any. Okay. And then, yeah, this is where the handout is. The next one's April 20th. Any other questions? Yes, yeah, it is. It's not meant to be tricky, right? It's gonna be like open. Let's take care of that the other phone, no. It's gonna be open-ended. If there's anything that you think, I can like. Any, yes,
What if we're not able to finish within the 90 minutes?
if you're not able to finish within 90 minutes, I think, so I was like doing some research, so how much time given, in 90 minutes, like, did any of you take like English in high school? I mean, we have to all take English. I feel like right now it's 40 minutes. So don't think of this as like an essay you would write at home. It's like this like a first draft type thing. So if you don't finish, we can go on a case by case basis. Ideally, you're going into spring break next week. You're probably just gonna be done here. But if it's like 90 minutes hit, half or more of the class still like I need more time, then I'll pivot and like I'll give you a 1 minute. That sounds good?
Yeah.
Unless you do have accommodations for extra time, email me. Questions? Yes. Emma?
Yeah, so it's kind of related, but that's about the weekly engagement. I was just looking ahead because I saw that you posted that we were doing like the A-class thing, and it said that the next weekly reading engagement is due March 22nd, the Sunday before we come back. And I didn't know if that was just gonna.
In the syllabus, you mean?
Yeah, syllabus. And I just didn't know if that was gonna like stay because we don't have we have a weekly reading engagement, like.
You're talking about week 10. Yeah, so that's spring break. Talking about week 10?
Yeah.
So you're saying, yeah, but you guys have to read this so that we can.
But that's the week of our spring break, the week.
I know, but what are we gonna do with the other?
No, I was just wondering, because then you also said. No.
Yeah, so like, you don't have to submit one,
Yeah.
and we'll take it on the 9th. So you have from the 10th to the 15th, if you wanna get ahead, to do the readings and submit it, after that you don't do anything for spring break.
Or so that was kind of like my question.
Yeah.
Phrased it.
Yeah, it's okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. When are you gonna open that one up?
I'll open it up by next week or this week.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll open it up by the end of this week. Okay. Does that, let me make a note. Open week, what? 10?
10.
I'll do it by Friday. That sound good?
Perfect.
Okay. Cool. Maybe sooner, but I'll do it by Friday. I'll send it or not.
Okay.
Any other questions? No? Okay. So we're just gonna take a quick, moment to talk with a partner. I'll be walking around just to hear what's going on. Why is it important for culturally responsive teachers to have an understanding of critical race series. So I'm gonna partner. What comes to mind? Why is it important? And we're not gonna like share out in class, talk, because we're gonna be talking about this and we'll come back.
Why is it important for your culture and teachers to have understanding of history?
Um, one thing that immediately I think about was from the Latin Billings reading, and it was talking about like the conception of critical race theory and how it came um from like legal studies. And I think that one thing important to remember is that the one thing that distinguishes it from the legal studies is that the fact that it takes into account like storytelling and people being able to take their power back by explaining like, no, this is what I lived, this is what I experienced, and therefore it's grounded in some form of reality. And so that's why it's important for teachers to recognize that is that in a racialized world already, you're gonna have students that have all types of different perspectives. And if you happen to have one that's like a monolith, you have a specific like group of students or demographic, even within them, there is going to be variation.
And, like when you said that, I thought of like that they might have a debate within the classroom when they have those ideas happening in the classroom within the students.
Mhm.
Yes.
I have friends. Like, and everyone is different.
Yes.
You know, it's like the I say it's like throw up different.
Yeah. Even though if they're from the same race, their life experiences are different.
I think on top of that too, like I'm looking at like page 9, and I wrote something like it's so like proliferated and intrinsic that it's just seen but unspoken. Like so, like associating certain things to whiteness and asserting associating certain things to like blackness. How there's like a dichotomy there, and it's on purpose because it's been shown in society for a long
And so here's the fact attendance, the CRT, I believe Black and those different articles. The social construction of race, race is a social construct that has been created to create power differential for participation. A social construct is something that is created by society, what becomes reality. It's not really like true biological thing, right? It's social science, I mean, it has been created. And even though it's not real, we can say, well, let's say it's not really true. It doesn't mean it doesn't have actual material or physical, all kinds of consequences of. And then these slides are already uploaded. The normality of racism. CRT argues that racism is not only present and random, isolated instances. Racism is woven into the fabric of American society. Three, interest convergence. I think there were some questions about this one in Lewis now famously argued that racial progress is made for marginalized groups of color and is beneficial to the group in power. White folks are just like this idea of what is. Are there any questions about that? No. Some examples that are happening or have happened is like anti-DEI stuff, right? After 2020, pandemic hit, the yes, what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd and him being murdered by the police, uprisings that were happening. Do y'all remember that? Were y'all in high school? Yeah. Uh, that was a moment where like a lot of different corporations started including like diversity, equity, inclusion, like having workshops. Um, People just like wanted to teach folks and like learn about it and be better, right? But now we're seeing there's like bans on it, right? So that's like an example of interest conversion. It was accepted when they like gave you an idea of like you're a good person, you're good, or You want to present yourself as like being a good kind of history, but in the moment when that's no longer seen as necessary, it's like you want to like put it away. Right? That's what CRT argues for. Or argues as differential discrimination, marginalized racial groups are subjected to negative stereotypes in a way that serves the majority. So creating and upholding negative racial stereotypes is beneficial because certain racial groups are inferior to others. Then an equal outcome was justified and can be explained away. And this happens like in all aspects. And I'll give you an example outside of like, right? Black and Latino communities have higher risks of diabetes than high blood pressure. Right? And I remember working with some high school students on one summer on my research project. And, you know, they just said, well, that's just a high probability because they're Black and Latino. And I was like, well, let's think a little bit deeper. Is it because they're Black and Latino that they have a higher probability of having high risk of diabetes and high blood pressure? Or is it because of the conditions that don't provide them with equitable health resources and grocery stores and, you know, equitable pay, right? And not being pushed out from their communities where they have the type of nourishment and the type of knowledge about the food from their traditions, right? Is that what it is? Or like, does that play a role? And that's part of that, right? Like this idea that people of color or marginalized communities get blamed for their situations, rather than thinking about the structure of how these things are born. Is that like a helpful example to think of that? And then intersectionality, you would hear this one a lot. Um, credited to Crenshaw. It's the idea that people in society are affected and defined by their intersecting demographic identities. Intersectionality is commonly paired with the idea that a person's self-image is shaped by their intersecting identities. So, you know, we all have intersecting identities, right? Like, I am a professor, right? But I'm also a first student, starting 10, right? But I'm also a woman, and let me be clear, I'm a cis woman, right? But I'm also yellow, and with English. But I was also born and raised in Chicago, right? And I'm the child of immigrant, right? But I speak English fluent, right? These are all my intersecting identities. Um, and all these things are true, but I will experience being racialized depending on the place I'm in or the situation I'm in. And it doesn't mean that I'm always going to be marginalized in that situation, right? Because what if I'm around many of my family members who didn't get to go to school? I have a privilege, right? I got to go to school, but I have all these extra resources I learned in college, right? So thinking about our intersectional experiences, not just from our position of marginalization, but our position of like, what are our privileges as well? Right? Question, comment, thoughts? That was just a quick review. Cool. So we're gonna hear Latson Billing. This is Gloria Latson Billing, amazing educator, contributor, scholar. She's already retired. We're gonna watch her for like 6 minutes. Grab my markers because I love this chalk. But I'll be writing some notes as we watch it. And if you have any thoughts, you know, jot them down. We're not gonna watch the whole thing, but the 6 minutes of this.
The lovely program, yes, Wisconsin, original production.
Critical race theory, or CRT, is a new framework or way of thinking, but it has received renewed attention due to anti-CRT legislation created across the United States. So what is CRT exactly? Why is it producing such a strong reaction in some states? So much that some lawmakers are pushing to ban teaching it in schools. Let's find out why race matters when it comes to history, racism, and education. Race theory, or CRT, can be a controversial buzzword today. That wasn't always the case. In fact, it isn't even a new concept. CRT dates back to the 1970s and 80s as a framework for legal analysis that was created by several legal scholars to suggest that race is a social construct and that racism is not merely individual bias or prejudice, but something embedded in systems, policies, and practices. CRT suggests that because racism is so deeply ingrained in the fabric of our nation, even well-intentioned decisions made by individuals can help to fuel racism. And for some, therein lies the perceived controversy, resulting in the creation of anti-CRT legislation. In Wisconsin, the legislature passed a bill in January 2022 that would limit the discussion of racism in K-12 classrooms, including any teaching that, quote, an individual, by virtue of that individual's race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. The bill was vetoed by Governor Tony Evers. Critics of anti-CRT legislation say that if America desires a more equitable future, then we must be willing to acknowledge the atrocities of the past and their influence on the present. National Academy of Education president and professor emerita at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, joins us to share more about the importance of CRT and its application in and outside of the classroom. Hello, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. Thank you so much for joining us today. My pleasure. So can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do? Well, I am Professor Emerita at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and that's just a fancy way of saying I'm retired. But I will confess I am failing at it. The world's worst retiree. I've been fascinated by the education of Black people in this country because it's such an incredible story. Where I see inequities in that education, I always want to hold it and explore it and try to make sense of it. I appreciate you coming in to talk with us about a very important topic. For some, it's the topic to raise right now, CRT. Well, and I want to be clear the context that we are in right now on the heels of some horrific messages. Most people are clearly the warning being driven by their hatred. It's very just saying to someone, oh, study critical race theory or you know about critical race theory, I often start questioning how you explain racism. Because I think the explanation that one has really kind of makes them, puts them in a context for understanding the world. So if your explanation is, well, people just need to work harder. Millions of people need to work harder? And think about it. If you start off by saying, well, there isn't any racial inequality, then I don't actually think I can have a debate with you because we don't see the world the same way. On almost every social benefit, whether it's health, wealth, education, employment, we can see racialized disparity. So how do we, in a classroom with students, who typically graduate students, so let me be clear, I would probably say something like, well, it's not as if we haven't had it. We've had. From the time Black people arrived on these, for about the mid-20th century, 1950, our explanation was pretty much biogenetic. So ingrained in our thinking that many universities, many colleges, had departments and programs in eugenics. We said that was a science. This group of people is biogenetically inferior. Now, I would imagine that a lot of thinking people did not buy into that. Well, mid 1950s as a marker because it's at this point that we have the brown. And brown is a landmark.
We'll talk about brown in a little bit. Any thoughts or things that come to mind, or questions about what, I mean, we're like doing and the person who's interviewing.
Yes, I really like when she was talking about, like, if you ask someone what their explanation is for racial inequality, and reveal their perspective on the world. I totally related to, like, if someone says that it doesn't exist, then you can't even have a conversation. Like, there's no way that you can change their perspective.
Yeah, or it just also tells you like how far you can go, or what way you can, right? I just,
Actually, that point stuck out to me too, and I actually thought that was weird, because I thought they were gonna go more like, oh, if they don't even think it exists, then I feel like those are the people's whose minds probably quite big. It just kind of seemed like they're like, oh, if you don't see it, then like, I'm just gonna give up on you, and I'm gonna try to like share you my perspective.
yeah.
Yeah, why do you think that's strange, or when I think about it?
If you're not angry, then we're done. We'll go back to it.
Okay.
I'm not, because I was gonna mention like how. Like the thought, but. But I would. Yeah, just stuff their ways. Let's do kind of back to it. Okay. Why get it? But a lot of people, it's so hard to change their mind. It's stuck in a mindset of how they think, right? So like even trying to look like that work or trying to explain the certain concept of that. Some people are reading, people are fighting much tonight.
Yeah.
Also important to contextualize that in the conversation that she's talking about other adults. And that's why it's important to realize that you don't, if someone doesn't agree with you online, the existence of like racial inequality or whatever, it's because that in and of itself is like what you're saying, like, no, that doesn't exist, and you never admire what it is. And so at that point, it's hard to argue with someone like that, but needless to say, talking to a child, but a lot more plasticity in their brain, they're exposed to new things, that things up like fun, that's where the real value plays.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of like just trying to pick your battles. Like the whole purpose of CRT is to like have progress forward. But if you're focusing on debating with people who can't change their minds no matter what, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your breath. Finding people who maybe are ignorant and want to change, or maybe don't understand that racial inequality is in our society is this. We should be working on changing their minds instead of changing the minds of people who don't want to change. It's not that like I agree with what she's saying, but I don't necessarily like it. I think that we should talking to people who can't be changed, because, we gotta give them a shot at least, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most productive way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'm like, we have to people who are like that, it is really disheartening because it really, I feel like in a way, like, you're someone like you can't see your really you're doing yourself. And oh, at first, um, thinking about the big stuff. Both ways, it's, 2026. Way I grew up. Mhm. I just trying to, try to tell them and show them with like real evidence, like this is what's going on. They still don't. They still. They don't want to accept it, and our family. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I've like seen them. Okay, well, I said something, okay?
Go ahead.
I think to that point, I think it's still, even if that's the case, it's like intergenerational, like this representation, then I think it's even more important to still try to talk to them, because they're just gonna keep passing down this from you. Give excuses and just be like, oh, well. The fraud.
Yeah, I think more power to all of those points that are being made, that resistance is still like pivotal key. Someone can't change on something, but like we all have been echoing, like it's trying to voice that energy, because at the end of the day, you're constantly fighting against someone who's like around you. But those days of like, I am on top, I'm superior, the only way. Doesn't literally tear them down, they're like, no, they're not superior. What are you trying to do? So it's like the double edged sword.
Yeah. And we're kind of going into the binary, which happens because that's how things are structured, right? Right, right. Within something about it. You'll bring up points, and it seems different from like summarizing kind of like technology. Um, it's complex and it's nuanced, right? And it really depends on where you're at in life and who you are and what you're willing to put on the line. It depends on what aspect of life you're in. And the resistance or the speaking back looks different. It might be in your classroom. It might be within your family. It might be within your friendships. It might be policy, right? Like you're going to be advocating and taking on different roles depending on what you do. But I want to go back to what Kat said at first about like, it's kind of weird because I would have thought you want to do everything to push these ideas, right? And I think that perspective opens us up to think about why there's even a lot of anti-fear, right? Why? Because do you all know what the main argument about being anti-fear is? Like why those people in office are saying like you shouldn't teach critical race theory in your classroom or in classroom.
I can say it's
An American.
Part of it is like, I think people are scared that it's gonna make us villainize our own country.
In our country, yeah, it's not seen as real knowledge or important. There's another, yeah,
Or even like they know the past of all the.
big up, right? What does it do? And we have to like do something about it. We're actually gonna like acknowledge. But it's like one typical thing that I have heard, with the anti-CRT, so something happening, I was living in Austin, in my grad program, and we were going to chiropractor. It's like, yeah, this anti-CRT, and she didn't know what I'm studying. I just went for it. And she's like, this anti-CRT stuff, they're teaching the white boys to hate themselves, that they're bad. They're teaching white kids that they're, and it's just like, I was like, what? Right? So it goes back to what you were saying, Pat, of like, I thought that that would be what you would do, you would teach. And it's like, no, even Lives and Millions is saying, like, we're trying to expose you to what these things are. We're not trying to teach anti-whiteness, right? Because even whiteness is construct, right? So we'll be talking more about that, but like, it makes sense why you would think that, right? Because that's what most people would be, who don't, who are still learning about it. And that's how we're gonna approach teaching, but it doesn't happen in one lesson, right? It's a stand to take, when you're analyzing curriculum or analyzing schools and structure. So, on page, and I don't, you might not have these readings because they're from, well, for week 6. So unless you carry on reading, but on page 7 to 21 of just what is critical race theory and what is it doing in the next field of education. On page 17, lesson building outlines the critical race theoretical process of education. And she talks about curriculum, he talks about instruction, page 19, as well as assessment, school funding, and desegregation. And, you know, here she walks you through thinking about how CRT is relevant to thinking about these 5 specific things that are related to education and schooling, right? Which are relevant to us, right? CRT is, you can think about it in other aspects, but, you know, we're bringing it back to schools and learning. Does anyone remember what she said? What everyone would want to talk about?
Well, that's one of that stuff that we don't have to.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to talk about that first. School funding. You all know how schools are funded. Public schools. I mean, private schools are paid, right?
Yes, sometimes it's from like the village, sometimes it's grant or the big funded.
Grant and state funded. Mm-hmm. Yes, Karen? Yeah, property tax. Property tax.
Or even, I remember my high school was based off of attendance.
Yes. So property taxes, that's how you decide how much money is gonna be allocated per student. And then attendance is how they can make sure they get all the money possible, because let's say they have 500 students, they have to show that those 500 students are attending school a certain percentage of the year, probably like 50% more. And if they don't, that's only 450 that they are gonna count. So they're only gonna get money for 450 students instead of the 500, just because cities have like a lot of access, right? So that's why in a lot of Title I schools, certain terms, schools that need a lot of resources, for particularly in like lower income neighborhoods, um, attending school is important, because if kids aren't in school, that means that funding is gonna be affected the next school year. And then, people move all the time. They don't just move in the school year, right? Like they move around. So maybe there was one year where there weren't as many students, but then there is an influx. You're still getting a budget based on last, year, right? So it's never based on the current, it's on the previous. Yeah, perfect attendance award, push that. And then through attendance, if kids are going, right, there's these deficit perspectives of like, oh, these parents don't care about school. right? Why don't they send them to school? Why do they go take a trip to Mexico for 2 weeks, right? They don't see it as like learning, you know, in the communities. And yes, it's nuanced, right? There's different structures here based on like families, but it really makes us think about like why do we pit students who, or put students who are absent or have are found to be absent as just like one type of student and not try to understand why they're absent and what are the circumstances at home, right? So yeah, so to kind of summarize, property taxes, which are based on a certain district or neighborhood, right? For Chicago would be a district, or like a suburb, it would be like that. But that's a little smaller. Those are the ones that fund public schools. We know that we live in a racially segregated city, right? And sometimes even neighborhoods, right, in suburbs. And with knowing the access to education, we know that there's a disparity also in who has degrees and who has higher paying jobs, right? And that there are gaps. So guess what? More affluent neighborhoods will have more money, and lower income neighborhoods will have less money. I don't know how many of you watch the news, but the superintendent in California was recently raided by the FBI because he was giving additional funds to some of the lower income schools. And they were arguing that that was discrimination. So that's, you see how like law is used, right? So that's why law is very important and policy when we're thinking about these things. Because maybe in the classroom we don't see it, but it does impact and make its way into school. So these are some states based off of 2023. The dark ones are the ones that have state level anti-CRT measures. Um, These measures school district level, usually you would learn like over here, not a lot. But Illinois, we're like in the middle of everybody who's anti-CRT. Yeah. And then there's also banning of books. Like these books, some of them maybe you've read them in your children's literature class. And they, by ban meaning like someone went in and took all those books and hid them somewhere and students can't read them because they're anti-American. There's banning of books, and it's not new. It's been happening. It's been happening for throughout history in the U.S. And that's why I bring it up, right? Because a lot of these books are written by people from those same communities. Well, color. Native folks, Pride Bread. I mean, I read that book, like, what's wrong with Pride Bread? Right? Reading the 1619 Project, you know, African American and Latin history in the U.S., Indigenous people's history, gender and fear, right? Separate is not equal. Some of these books have been done in states like Florida and in other states. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not here in Illinois, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't have nowhere. So I just wanted to link this back to what's going on right now. Have you heard of anti-TI? And you know, different people have different opinions about it. But DI is not an abstract concept, it's a framework for building institutions like any ideas and institutions, right? Where everyone belongs and is able to thrive while addressing systemic barriers that historically included marginalized. And diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. All of those we benefit from as a class, right? If you look at the micro level as an institution and as like a country, right? Because we all bring all these different perspectives and they help us in better thinking. And we also see where there's gaps and where people need additional support, right? But a lot of that is being cut. And unfortunately, it's presented as like just a thing about race. It's affecting students with disabilities. It's affecting, you know, women, not just like people of color, like women of color, also white women, right? And it's affecting, yeah, all aspects of like how we're thinking about education and school and what should be taught and what shouldn't. So there's a link to the article if you want to read it. Any thoughts, comments on that? Let's see the time. Well, we're gonna watch one. Yeah, we'll finish this. I don't think we need our laptops right now. I just want to make sure we're all focused. We're gonna watch historian and author Iram X Mandy talk a little bit more about CRT.
It's inconceivable that a white teacher would be teaching white children that they are evil because they're white. But that's what people think, even though it's like.
I don't know if some of you guys have seen this critical race theory. It's basically teaching kids to hate our country and to hate each other based on race.
This theory is an intellectual sort of people that emerged in the 1970s and early 1980s among legal scholars and lawyers who recognized that racial disparity was persistent despite the public pronouncements that all these laws on the books were race neutral. And so these scholars recognized that something was wrong here and that they had taken a new critical approach to examine the law, to examine policies, to examine the structures which they recognized were the source of these continuing disparities and not what's wrong with people.
And what are some misconceptions around critical race theory?
Well, there are many that critical race theorists argue that white people are inherently evil. That's not true. That critical race theorists argue that everything and everyone is racist. That's not true. Critical race theorists would be the first to say there are people battling and challenging racism. And those are the people we should that people that critical race theory is widely taught in schools. It's not even widely necessarily taught in law school, where it originated, where people wanted to be taught, let alone in elementary schools. Another misnomer about critical race theory or even anti-racism is that it's anti-white or racist. And I don't think people realize that that's one of the oldest and most vital white supremacists talking.
Teaching kids to hate their country and to hate each other is not worth one red cent.
Critical race theory is not appropriate for our kids to learn and to have in our school systems.
I don't think it should be taught in schools at all. I think we should fund any money to allow that to happen.
So how many of you have heard of critical race theory in a class? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? That's maybe a third of them, right? So you see, there's this assumption that it's being taught everywhere, but the fact is that like it's been until recent years where it's even included in teacher educational programs. Like this class itself comes from the place of understanding. Like our teachers need to have an understanding of what it is to be multicultural, diverse, from not just race, but religion, gender, sexuality, language, all the diversity, right? And this class didn't exist when I was getting prepared to be a teacher. Right? It was like starting, and I'm not even that old. So the fact that this class is even a class we're learning about this, like this is not something that not everyone gets to have this type of class in their teacher education program. And then not everyone is actually learning about this. It's just like this push to try to create fear and to name something as wrong, because there's actually a sense of fear from inside that we're going to reckon with it. What does it mean if you reckon? It means that we have to acknowledge the native benefit. It means that we need to acknowledge the land was stolen. It means we need to acknowledge that enslaved people were used as property and that they contributed to the foundation of this country, right? And then we're indebted to with their descendants, right? It means all those things. And I don't think, I think that there's different perspectives of like what it would mean if we would reckon with the Now, just to get back into the readings and also like how to how to approach this in the classroom or how does this inform our approaches in the classroom? Counter narratives or counter stories was brought up, right, in the reading. And counter narratives or counter stories are a method of telling the stories of people whose experiences are not often told. And they're specific to, they come from critical race theory, right? These have been created through that or influenced through that. Counter stories, on the one hand, provide an opportunity to hear alternative voices, and on the other hand, challenge the dominant narrative, which usually carry assumptions and prejudices of the dominant group. So counter stories, children can write their own counter stories by bringing in the oral stories of their families from marginalized communities, the oral stories from their communities, right? Kind of like what you all were doing, going into the community and framing it and thinking with these theories about the community in different ways, right? That's a form of a counter narrative. Here are some ways that a culturally responsive teacher can use counter narrative. In order to do them, it's important that you have an understanding of critical race theory is, right? So, for example, counter storytelling and voice. Other voice in relationship to the majoritarian story is silence and irrelevant. There's this one dominant narrative, and that's the only truth, right? But if you include counter storytelling and voice, you're going to think about whose voices matter or matter the most in the classroom in teaching content. Whether you're teaching math, science, language arts, PE, whatever all the subjects are, right? You can ask yourself that question in your lesson planning. Because who are the scientists that are being introduced to my students? Is it just your typical European white men? Or am I including women? Am I including queer folks? Am I including people of color, right? Counter storytelling and positionality. So this is like the description and this is the questions that you can ask yourself as you're thinking about your pedagogy and your team. Is this helpful? Yeah. I don't want to keep us too long because I know we're getting tired, but this is, I think, our last question. What do Latson, Billings, Watson, and Bullock, and this was from week 6, all similarly argue in their articles? How do Latson, Billings, Watson, and Bullock discuss the relationship between, sorry for that typo, between race and achievement? So you all kind of named it before, but what are they kind of relating to? With CRT and anti-racist orientation. I think that was the point. There's no right or wrong answer, but I do want to speak, yeah, so we can get to it together. Yes, Brennan? Kind of talk about how much one of our education is very expensive. Yeah, so there's these dominant narratives that are being told. And what about the trouble there? How are they influencing curriculum? Yes, Caleb?
The banning of the book. Not, they're taking away knowledge that was been taught already, like. And students that are working right now are not. They're being popped up.
Yeah, so it's happening to books. Yeah, there's banning of books that's happening. But what is that main thing that is the reason why things are being? And I can remind you, maybe I can just summarize. Elicit some background knowledge, another strategy. Doing the race talk with teachers. That's a professor that was reflecting on how there was a teacher that was using the word urban to talk about Black students. And the teacher didn't realize that they were doing that. But the teacher was using the word. And the professor, also wanted to make sure that they brought it up to the attention. But, that's actually racist, but also do it in a way that like there wasn't any like burning of bridges, right, and no more relationship between them. And they also brought up how race is difficult sometimes for folks to reflect on and think about. Whether if they haven't necessarily been racialized in a way like Black folks have, right? So here they're talking about race and how race operates in language, right? Erica Bullock was talking about math and the stereotype that Black students are good Black students, right? And and kind of pointing out that counter narratives try to challenge that, but also saying like, should our purpose only be to provide counter narratives? Or should our purpose be to focus on the intelligence of Black children without censoring their comparison to white, right? That's like more of a deeper thought, but it goes back to always putting on Black student success in comparison to white, and should that be a thing that just to like quickly summarize. And then Latin Billions is talking about like, why is critical race theory even in education? If education is such a nice field, you know, kids just like learn how to write. Well, did you know that learning how to read and write was a crime for enslaved people? That it was a crime that they weren't allowed to read? Why? Because literacy contributes to knowledge and critical thinking, contributes to probably wanting to have freedom, right? So what I'm trying to get to is that all of them are talking about the structure of racism and how it operates in different facets, from literacy to the way we talk, like code talking, to the way we perceive what school should be and not be different. Yeah. Yeah, so there's like the big, like policy, federal, like nationwide storytelling approach to it. And then there's also just the everyday life experience, right?
Even though we're talking about the video, you also,
What's your thing?
yeah, how they, how people's minds are already set. Even sometimes they're educators, so their mind is already set how it already looks, or where they come from, they're already not smart enough, they don't know how to read, they don't know how to do math, so that's also another part.
Yeah, like if you already have these preconceived notions and you haven't taken the time to reflect, right? Like I think there was one of these three readings are the ones for this week, but like the assumption that the Black students who were immigrants, right, from the region, that they were already inferior or like they were not, they were already behind because they didn't speak English, right? Or because they're emerging bilingual. So labelling not speaking English already are behind instead of understanding that like, oh no, these students are bilingual. They really know speak English, right? They can draw from both linguistic repertoire. I remember one time I used to observe as a grad student, I used to observe research teachers like y'all in your clinicals. I would like little feedback and all that. And then the meeting with the PT, the classroom teacher. The classroom teacher was like, yeah, you know, I was telling so students like my friends that um these are your good students and these are your yellow students. And like, or these are your stars. And I mean, the person didn't mean it bad. Like they were just like they have good intentions. They're grouping students because they want to get them to learn English, I guess, right? That's their justification. But like using code word, ELL means that you're behind, right? Being bilingual means you're bad, you're behind. So I bring this up because all of us will probably just have to take a step back at times and be like, wait, I have an assumption there. I need to check myself, and it's okay. I'll make mistakes, but I can do better than you. Right? And I see y'all very tired, unless there's any more comments. Yes.
How you say you, they're like, teachers become. I was doing observation hours in a STEM major, so I was doing they're like a code major and orientation. And the sped teacher was like, yeah, they're slow as hell. And I turned and I just stared at him and I was like, I'm sorry, what did you say?
Yeah,
And
code
he's
word.
like, wait, I didn't mean it like that. They just act like they don't know anything. They always ask for help. And I'm like, because maybe they need help.
And sometimes maybe that teacher came in with all the mental health and the schooling system itself is set up to create those narratives. Yeah. Like they're, so, and he speaks. He doesn't look like he's still being labeled as young. It's like he's still. I know she sometimes needs help, but she doesn't need help. Like she will talk to me, like, um, about other things. How she feels something like I was thinking. Yeah, that label policy is stigmatized. And I think it all depends on like your teacher and your school, how you treat like it. But I think you bring up a point of like tracking, knowing your courses how you're being taught, like different ability levels, right? But like usually the typical is like group all the little kids. You know, this is good in this. I think realities of like um always be here instead of like mix or trying different types of things. Tracking is also has been, you know, historically even in racist realities and perspectives, like more track in diverse schools are certified. There's a few that are not. And a lot of the students in upper or like the honor state courses tend to be like white students, Asian students, right? But then that creates also these myths about Asian students and also. So it's about thinking about what is purpose of tracking and why do we have it? And this conversation will continue as the semester goes, but you all need a break. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Okay?
You look tired. Those two places. You had to at least consider. Doesn't matter. I could. We got it. In my mind. Yeah.
I know the syllabus. I'll update it. I feel like based on. Yeah.
I just didn't want to.
I know, I get it. Yeah. No worries. I don't.
Well,
Yeah. I know it's like. Yeah, you find like, I feel like my best, like the best parent. Oh, yeah, there's some of them. There's some project. I think that. I want to. So, um. What is that? Yeah. Another option is that. All right. Like you said, it has to be done for. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, let's see, so if you do the 12. I think. That's fine. Yeah. I like that. Right. Okay. So it's one. But- And then, Like. Well, yeah. Or that thing. The audience. Yeah. Yeah. Sure, back there.
No, I didn't live there. I just, I spent a lot of time there. I grew up in South Atlanta, like, I'm with.
Where Archer is, or?
No, like West Elton. It's like a super small square. It's literally right by my friend.
By the highway, by the airport?
Yeah. I live around. Like. You have 7 blocks away from. But my dad, when he first came here, he split like a big part of his life and back in
Okay.
so we would go to church. Yeah. And so, like, a lot of time there. Yeah, it's actually in my,
Oh, yeah, I got one, yeah.
um,
I think they expanded.
yes, but I talk about that.
We
How
do.
much of it-
I used to go to the
That's the one right there, like on 47th, right? Yeah, now it's like, yeah, I think it's still working on it, because they tried to open it with the door,
Oh, and.
and it wouldn't open. But
Okay.
they have like another city paper,
Yeah.
and I think maybe they just came here, going, and not open a bigger space, so just kind of like now, I try to open the door.
Okay.
Yeah, but I spent a lot of time there going to, my dad didn't want to live there, because, well, he grew up there in like the 80s. I know it's a lot.
But somehow they thought like moving like. Blocks
Yeah,
back.
no, literally, yeah, no, because he didn't want to live in back there, so we lived in Brighton Park, and I'm like, hey,
I was gonna say, cause yeah. Brighton Park is has this like cool community. Community center.
empty.
Are you part of it or?
No, my oldest sister actually works on it.
Okay.
Yeah, so like.
Like, for Chappie, really cool.
And yeah, when all the ice stuff was happening, I don't know, they were trying to have legal help and stuff for folks, so. It's been really important.
Yeah.
It was big or prominent, I think, when was. Like.
Okay,
So
so
she was
not
in
like
it. When she was in high school, she would work for them, but they didn't have it. They have a small little building out there.
yeah.
Uh, they didn't go so much people have this space. Now, like, they do a lot of things that work. For instance,
I mean, I grew up on this one. Then.
yeah, I know, there's a lot of stuff that's going on over there. You mentioned it over there. There's always. Like,
Oh, like for me, it was like.
Right. I think it's just like also the racialized context, like they don't understand how like race works here. The fact that this is like on like like doesn't like in the head too.
Because, you know. But it's like right next to there's something. Like.
And those are the people, those are up there.
Oh, I did.
Oh, but I am about it's so tough.
Oh, my snack. Probably bring words for it. I don't want. Oh, that. Oh, my God.
That's probably fine.
I got.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's just. Oh, my God. Yeah. It's so great so much. Everybody, if y'all can go to this link. You know, just write what you know about Brown versus Board of Education. If you've heard of it, you know anything about it. What you know about it, if you haven't heard of it. If you haven't, say, you know. And first one. Yeah. I don't know. The what? Oh, yeah, it's okay if you don't know.
Oh, no.
Yeah, sorry, oh, no, we gotta get closer. So the bigger QR code, like,
I was 18. I'm also.
yeah, what do you know about Brown education?
I should have said that. Really funny.
Okay, let's see what y'all are writing. Okay, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 responses. We got like.
Mine's not sending through, it's loading.
Oh.
It's taking a minute.
Thank you.
No, it's just buffering.
Turn your Wi-Fi off.
I have to read.
Okay. The internet.
It's taking.
Internet. For those looking into astrology, Mercury, retrograde.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. You see that the planets align the other day?
I'm so pissed, I even missed it.
Oh, yeah, hold on.
I'm so pissed.
Okay, so we're gonna see what we know. I don't know her. Okay. I don't know her. Hers are no longer to be segregated, desegregated education. Okay, I remember reading about what it was, an intro to the education class, but I don't remember what it was. They got rid of segregation, I'm not sure, segregation. Lawsuit against the Board of Education. Has been around 100 years. I've heard about it, but I don't know. I don't remember. Segregation of schools is a violation of an amendment, cannot recall. Cool, so some of us know that it's related to education. And it was about desegregation. So we're gonna watch this quick little black industry segment of Brown versus Board of Education. Get your laptop or your.
Hey, going back to the court. You've been watching this series, it's starting to feel like a pretty familiar place. There's a lot of history played out. While many Black Americans were being kept from voting because of terrorism, Jim Crow law, courtroom became a place where unfair practices could be challenged. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most important cases in my system, the Supreme Court case, Brown v. Board of Education. Let's start the show. Black people often didn't have representation. Bodies sometimes made changing laws and legislation difficult. Courts were one avenue for which Black Americans were able to fight for their citizenship rights. Feel like they had changed. When the Constitution was amended through the Reconstruction Amendment, aka 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, Black Americans were formally made citizens of the United States. Citizenship is important. Terms that you have access to. White Americans aren't okay with Black Americans. They benefited Black Americans not having the same protections and resources that they did. So
white Americans created Jim Crow laws that implemented segregation into Black American rights vote. We'll talk more about the civil rights movement in two more episodes. Segregation, important place to start. Segregation wasn't just purely bad, but also discreetly, maybe not so discreetly, assured that Black Americans wouldn't be able to access all of the practical material benefits of their citizenship. It set the stage for the Board of Education. Access to public school education was definitely one of those citizenship rights that Black Americans were entitled to. For white Americans, Jim Crow law, Plessy v. Ferguson decision, which stated that separate but equal segregation okay to justify keeping the races separate. The reality was that separate fairly equal. Many schools for Black students were severely underfunded, and outdated materials were generally dilapidated. Schools for white students, on the other hand, often had drastically better resources. The injustice is clear. Black Americans started organizing to get their Black students education resources. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People had their eyes on segregation. That, I think, the commission, the Marvel report, in 200 pages, dealt directly with segregation. We had small increase for people education, public colleges, and universities. When it came to elementary and secondary schools, education wouldn't budge. But Brown v. Board of Education happened in the 1950s. So why are we talking about the 1930s? Well, things in the course of a long time. NAACP was playing the long game. The execution of their plans took about 20 years, starting with the leadership of Charles Hamilton Houston, a Harvard graduate, the director of the NAACP legal strategy, ending legal prowess mentee Douglas Marshall. 1952, NAACP brought 5 different cases of school segregation in the state. South Carolina, India, Kansas, Delaware, District of Columbia. NAACP lawyers presented legal arguments on how unconstitutional segregation, separate but equal, work. These 5 cases were combined into Brown v. Board of Education, went to the Supreme Court in 1953. Let's go to the top of it. Oliver Brown was an assistant pastor who lived in an integrated neighborhood. In September of 1950, Oliver Brown went to his local elementary school, Sumner Street, tried to enroll his daughter, Linda. The principal said that she would not be allowed to attend because she was Black. The school did not accept Black students. The principal also said that state laws allow for segregation. Basically, sorry, not sorry. Linda couldn't go to her local, which was only a few blocks away from home. She had to attend the all-Black school. Involved far you be a bus. This led very sleepy Linda Brown, very upset Oliver Brown. Different historians will tell you different things about what happened. Some say that Brown went to the NAACP, became part of the lawsuit. Others say that the entire act went to the local school in the first place, at the NAACP's. Either way, while there were eventually 12 other plaintiffs part of the NAACP's case, Oliver Brown, on behalf of his daughter, came to lead plaintiffs. Even though the associate the Brown name with desegregation, Linda Brown was never actually able to attend the Sumner School. Because by the time the ruling was handed down, she was in junior high. Thanks, Buffalo. Douglas Marshall was the chief attorney for the plaintiff. Marshall was a victim of, but also a victor over, segregated education. After graduating with honors from Lincoln University, unable to attend the University of Maryland Law School because he wasn't white. Undeterred, he attended Howard University School of Law instead, which had become the first Black law school in the nation in 1869. Graduated first in his class. He later went on to become the head of the NAACP legal defense. Ultimately, he will be appointed by Lyndon B. Johnson as the first Black American Supreme Court justice. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Back to Marshall's NAACP. Marshall and his team argued before the Supreme Court that segregated schools were unconstitutional, and separate but equal had to go. The court finally agreed with them. On May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court unanimously held that segregated public schools violated the Equal Protection Clause. In his decision, Chief Justice Earl Warren said, quote, "We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Therefore, we hold that the plaintiffs, others similarly situated for whom the actions have been brought are, by reason of the segregation complained of, deprived of equal protection of the law guaranteed by the 14th Amendment." This huge victory for Black Americans. Enforcing the ruling, different story. After Brown v. Board overturned separate but equal in schools, riots and violence erupted all over the country. White protesters terrorized Black communities throughout the South, especially South Carolina, Georgia, Texas, and Florida. White vigilante groups burned crosses, terrorized Black residents. Some scholars have argued that even though a budding civil rights movement propelled Brown v. Board to victory, backlash against the case accelerated the civil rights movement. Black Americans were increasingly harassed by angry segregation. Some school districts even decided to close all of their schools for Black children. For example, in 1959, Edward County School System of Virginia completely shut down. That white students didn't have to go to school with Black and white parents sent their children to segregated private schools. Black children either had to go to school in another county, which is unfeasible for so many families, or not go to school at all. It wasn't until 1960, another unanimous Supreme Court case, written the County School Board of Prince Edward County, that Prince Edward County schools reopened. Some Black children missed out on 5 years of their education. 5 years. So while it would be easy to look at Brown v. Board as an example of America changing for the better, the Supreme Court doing what's right simply because it was right. It's also important to look at the broader context that animated that decision. This time, tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union were at their peak. The Cold War found the present force of American global politics. Made officials, U.S. government, including justices on the Supreme Court, were acutely cognizant of segregation, images, violence, terror, and acted against Black people harmed the United States' reputation, their ability to say that American democracy was the greatest in the world. Chief Justice Earl Warren said in the 1954 speech to the American Bar Association that our American system, like all others, is on trial both at home and abroad. The extent to which we maintain the spirit of our Constitution with the Bill of Rights was in the long run do more to make it both secure, object of adulation, number of hydrogen bombs, and stockpiles. So while it was about Black children's right to an education, it also was about much more than that. Think about it. Jim Crow is so deeply entrenched in American society that people would rather shut down an entire school system for years rather than allow Black children. Essentially, Jim Crow and separate but equal policies were used to diminish the quality of the Black American citizenship experience. We all know quality education improves economic outcomes. When so many Black Americans were prevented from having access to the resources they needed for quality education, it perpetuated the community's economic despair. What's more, Brown v. Board also had some pretty drastic unintended consequences. As the ruling was being implemented across the country, tens of thousands of Black teachers and principals lost their jobs. Black children were now beginning to attend white schools. Those white schools didn't want Black teachers. The idea of a Black teacher or principal being in a position of authority over white students just a non-starter for many white parents. Another unsettling part about this is that while Brown v. Board attempted to get rid of segregation in American schools because of policy decisions around education, housing, zoning, that's true. The schools today, segregated as they were, late 1950s, clearly still a lot of work to do. So,
Yeah. So, I'm feeling, I don't know, I've been alive, you know, or what brown schools are like. I have like scribbles here. I'm sorry, I wish I had a whiteboard. I don't like chalk. But, yeah, do y'all have any things that you learned from this video? Yes, Debbie.
I'm planning.
Mhm. Mhm.
I thought I do things. Yeah. But I feel like.
I mean, I think to bring up a deep part, like, yeah, I see it. Any other comments to that or things related? Yes, Kat?
Cliff, that's why in my clinical hours that is like majority black, and smaller percentage of Hispanic and Spanish speaking neighborhoods and the areas. Like they don't mean it's not as purposefully segregated, that's just like the local.
Yeah. And dissertation, as we learn here, is happening by design. It's not just like happening because people want to just be around people who look like them, right? I mean, when Black folks do citizenship rights, right? Jim Crow laws said. Jim Crow laws are the laws that said separate but equal, right? Meaning that these rooms are for Black folks, or like this school's for Black folks and this school's for white, right? Have you seen those signs? Right? So Jim Crow laws separated everything. So it was code word, right? Like you're not saying, um, it's code word for saying stay segregated, right? Yes, Brandon?
People are like kind of. And it's just about like for that, and even though it's kind of far away.
Mhm. And we'll be talking about redlining next week, like more deep, like that's why we're still gonna have a conversation after, but redlining, you know, came off of like World War II, when a lot of the soldiers that were coming back, the GI Bill was introduced. Have you heard of the GI Bill, right? And it gave soldiers coming back from World War II, uh, what is it, loans, like low interest to be able to purchase homes, right? And there were a lot of homes that were purchased, like in suburbs and different places. But what realtors were doing is that they, well, one, those loans were given to Black soldiers that were coming back from World War II. And two, realtors were saying, that black family is moving into your neighborhood would go down in property. So what happened is that there was white flight and white families would move out. Right? And we'll talk more about that, but it goes back to what Jasmine was saying, like we tend to like click into groups, right? And that's not necessarily like good or bad, right? It's more expensive than that. But yeah, that happens. And the thing is that there's so many things that are coming to my mind, but like, Northeastern, one is a commuter school, right? So relationships happen differently here compared to like other traditional colleges where like people maybe live on campus, or a lot of the students live on campus, right? Um, Northeastern is a school that I think the largest group is like Hispanic and students. It's a Hispanic serving institution. Northeastern has not historically been doing the work and effort it should do to retain Black students. So it needs to improve that. And also, we also need to understand how race operates within Hispanic Latino communities. So a lot of anti-Blackness within some of those communities. Right? And also, so there's all these conversations, and we'll talk about it like as things come later, right? I'm just saying all these connections, but just to say that I grew up in a racially segregated neighborhood where mostly everybody was Mexican and spoke Spanish and English. And when I went to college, I was like, what is this? I was like little 18-year-old me. And it just broadened my perspective, and introduced me to so many things. And I think as future educators, not be, like we shouldn't just talk about Black history and Black equity only if we have Black students to do it with, regardless of their race or ethnic background. Does that make sense? We should talk about, Asian American students and history and economic contribution to our country, regardless if we're teaching a majority Asian American student or not, right? Now, if your student body is predominantly Hispanic Latino, yeah, you want to incorporate things from their culture to relate to them, to make them feel at home. That doesn't mean you don't teach them about, Black scientists or Black mathematicians, right? Or also even challenge the idea that it can be Black Latinos, right? Or Asians and Latinos, right? And again, we'll get to all of that, those conversations. But any other thoughts or perspectives based on, or just like questions? Yes, Joe? Mm-hmm.
Hearing segregation would be more for the American.
Yeah.
Than
Mm-hmm. Exactly, right? So this image of a reputation as a country, as a democracy, right? And doing this move will look good. But did people want to do that? Right? It depended, right? It depended where you were at. Um, so it happened, but then what came out of, well, one, Linda Brown didn't even get to her school, that was 2 blocks away from her house, right? She had to take 2 hour bus ride. Um, but after Brown versus Board, my scribbles here, so you can see. After Brown versus Board passed, there were riots, there was violence, there was terrorizing communities, abuse, harassment, right? That people were going, but also, as years passed and you had to integrate schools, what do they say? Some parents took their kids to private schools. They were like, we're not gonna put our students in public schools for everything to the Black students, right? And Black teachers have actually lost their jobs. And, a lot of you know that the majority of teachers in this country are white women, right? And many times we wonder, like, why is that happening? Well, at least we know that for Black teachers, there were like brilliant Black teachers teaching in these classrooms, but their credentials were no longer seen as valid credentials. They were seen as maybe assistants, right? So all of those teachers we like lost, right? And that's something to keep in mind in how, that has had an impact in schooling and how students feel at schools and all that. And it doesn't mean that like all white folks were against this, right? All I'm saying is that all these things were happening at a national level and at a local level. It doesn't mean that there were abolitionists who were also pushing and fighting for this, right? Because civil rights movement was happening, women's movement was happening, queer trans folks movement was happening, right? And as we read Black Panther Party, then there was also the Brown Beret, California area, and the Young Lords, which was primarily Puerto Rican, and there were a lot here in Chicago. They were organizing. I don't know if you caught it in the reading about the Black Panthers. Free and reduced lunch. That comes from the Black Panther Party. Who got inspired because they started a free lunch for schools, for Black schools, right? Because they wanted kids to be fed so they can learn. And after the Black Party was pretty much shut down by the FBI and the government, schools were inspired by that, and that's how they implemented. I mean, I was a free lunch kid, right? Or at least having lunches at school. So that's something to keep in mind, right? Like that we don't learn and who to attribute that. Any other thoughts about Board of Education? I know it can seem like boring or like law, but it's all interrelated. Yes, Taylor, or
I was gonna say, one of my, I have her on Facebook now, but we're going through a lot of like, because that's like, on her window, she put like, I support them. And then she had a flag in her room, like, identified and identified, and like, one of the people that were on the board, when it comes to like visit their class, they would rip it down. So they end up getting like into a conference, like, not like a conversation, but they were arguing. But as a student, we don't even see these things. We don't know the things that happen, so it kind of sucks because we don't know who's on our board or stuff like that. But as adults, we start to learn like, no, this is what they did really for. You end up getting hired because they were hired. Yeah, because of something. So it's pretty good. That's it.
unfortunately, some people lose their jobs for standing up, like they believe it's right, and so they think they're doing it. And some speaking, going back to what Jasmine said before, like more people speak up, right? People speak up, people make decisions, people go to lobby and they go to, they elect new school board members, right? School boards are important. They make all kinds of decisions. Um, so yeah. I how late it is, but I just wanted to point this out. Zen Education Project. It's a great resource if you're like, ever wanting to think about how to integrate one of these lessons, or maybe you have an assignment and you want to draw inspiration from one of those lessons. But they have this handout where they talk about like justice and repression for the struggles of Black education. And I bring this up because in 1739, the Stoneman Rebellion, it was an uprising by enslaved people in South Carolina. But then from that came repression, the South Carolina Negro Act, which is this law made it illegal to teach enslaved people to read or write, aiming to prevent further insurrectionists, right? So terms like insurrectionist comes up, right? Just because they're trying to learn how to read. Just bringing some perspective to now. How do these early anti-literacy laws for enslaved people connected to today's efforts to ban books and limit curriculum kind of curriculum?
We talked a little bit about it already, but being literate directly connects someone's personal power as well as power as a community. And if you keep a community illiterate, you keep them from power, you keep them from intellectualism. And part of that stops them from being able to stand up for themselves, stops them from being able to rally together.
Yeah, and it goes from like literacy to like young little kids. I mean, have y'all noticed, and I'm for I like technology, don't get me wrong. I like my phone, I like my iPad, and my computer. But I also see how I'm not gonna put my child in some of this like you might have to do it because how they take care of the child, because it's a single parent, whatever, you know. But what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of wealthier households that don't put their child in front of screens, right? But yet screens, that one-to-one laptop or iPads and some of these Title I schools, you know, kids aren't even writing anymore. They're just in front of a laptop, right? Like, is that good for them? Is that actually, is that being promoted as like good, valuable stuff? Or is it part of anti-literacy? And what communities is this happening? That's definitely. Yes,
Because, teacher said it's happening, like, he had books in her class, but it doesn't. They have like. They have. Yeah, but sometimes. Just to be like, oh my god. They're like.
Yeah. I mean, it helps with fine motor skills, being able to move things, right? It's not that we're like against it, but it's like how much of the day is it taking up? How much of the day is it just that? Are you getting experience of diversity of like forms of literacy? Yeah.
But it's also just like the country, it's like, it's a form of control. Much that.
And it's also tied to like capitalism, right? Capitalism is fast paced, it's produced. Like I feel better when I can type my paper because I learn how to type. Y'all take typing class? Okay, you like learn how to type real quick. So you can like write as much and as fast. So that you can do all these other things. But it's like, wait, it's okay to have a skill, but like why have your skills just being able to like write and take my time and things without feeling pressure? But like it's systemic, right? And it goes back to how it's rooted systemically. Um, these are more questions that I have, but I want to get to other things. So I'm gonna skip this. You can go back to it. Um, but I want to talk about anti-Blackness and how it functions or operates in or through. And Ross, in her paper, asks, what is the utility of theory of anti-Blackness in education? And what are the possibilities it opens up? What tensions does it reveal? How many of you have ever thought about anti-Blackness as a teacher and having a consciousness of it? Thumbs up. Um, a lot of things, can perpetuate anti-Blackness without us even realizing it because it's so systemically rooted and ingrained within schools, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that. So, definition, if some of you need it, is a particular form of racism that is historic, systemic, and rooted in advocacy, so hostility or dislike of the Black community. And here's an example. Someone who's heard of this? Yeah, who knows? Spoken to campus.
She was one of the first Black students to attend those in school.
Yeah,
and she got a lot of.
she's still alive.
I think she is, yeah.
You what? Yeah, right? You might have said, yeah, yeah. Books about her, right? Um, but the movie was being banned in Florida. It brought up like anti-American, you know, it was the argument that was like anti-American, like in America. It's looking the truth of like what she experienced going to the public school. Right? So that's from ethic like spanning her story, right? There's also, and it's different ways that it like operates. Oh, it's an overt hostility, so it's like in your face or explicit. So, for example, I don't know if you know, it was like on social media, Texas, where they're coming to Austin. This is like maybe 2 3 years ago. And there's like way more examples, but I'm not trying to go into like all examples, right? Because I will show you what actually happened. Ignoring Black intelligence, like who's expected to see? Oh, when someone talks about like, oh, you're too articulate, right? Black children with purple math, and red article, and that's backed up by research. A lot of the research is for taking a critical race lens or approach with saying Black students are just inferior in math. So that's why, well, like researchers like will like bring up like no, it's not that they're just inferior. Are they having the reasons that they need, or are they being taught? What are they bringing? Medium education because they're young or we're bilingual, right? I know what we're talking about. Also, the assumption that like all Black students are just enslaved people, and that there are actually Black students that are also immigrants from immigrant families, right? I'm from the Black diaspora from the Caribbean, Black America, other countries in Africa, right? So that's something that is important. Omissions and whitewashing, Black book banning, 69 projects with feminism, the hate to give, all these books, like Toni Morrison's books, Color Purple, there was a movie, and in a lot of places. Security, and it's just a shifting of how the truth is framed, right? How we explain slavery to children. In some Texas books, slavery is taught as immigrant cooking. And why does that matter to us? Because Texas is so big, it has so many school districts and among students that they have a high influence in the textbooks that are created for the whole country. Right? So that's why it matters. So if you're going to live in Texas, it matters to us because those books can make it for school district. Athleticism over intellect. So sports dominate the school life of Black students. Their opportunities get contained around sports. It's not doesn't mean that they can't do sports, but like their opportunities can be contained around sports. They could be also STEM students. They can also be art students, right? Explicitly targeted. You must play basketball, right? Or you look athletic. Put into a specific category over physical body rather than their mind or knowledge, right? They're being racialized as they look at in school with good intention at times, sometimes not. But it doesn't mean it still isn't a form of anti-Black. And adultification and discipline. Have y'all heard of zero tolerance policies? They're like really anti-Black because they push out so many Black students from the school. Discipline. And Black children often perceived to be way older than they actually are, right? And we see it over the news, or we see it like things that come out. Preschooler is being suspended. The cops are being called on preschoolers. Have y'all seen those articles? Yeah. And these are just some statistics. The schools right here, you want to go, they have statistics, but like the suspension rate of Black girls is the highest. They're the ones who experience the most suspension rates in the country because of complexity or I don't like your demeanor or I don't like your body language. You're not following rules, right? And that really is the reason for suspension.
A lot of stuff.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's all related, right? I think we talked about it earlier in the semester. Think about how schools are structured, right? Structured to operate. Um, there's like, well, there's the bells, everyone on the line, and the desk is looking, right? Like the learning is sometimes very like structured in a way that it doesn't allow students to express, their individuality and to keep control. Even uniform, right? Who has to wear uniforms and doesn't? Right? So I quickly want to go over these two terms. Refusal is a form of resistance. It rejects white supremacists and dehumanizing educational systems. It evokes this thing called the fugitive practice. And what we know is that students, teachers, and the Black community have been created alternative spaces for learning knowledge and affirmation, right? Like in the video, folks have gone to Harvard, even though it's probably a hard experience. Lawyers, law schools, created HBCUs, like Howard, right? Historically Black universities and colleges. Um, Teachers, being a Black teacher, before Brown Board of Education was like a very highly esteemed profession. Why? Because these were some of the top students in their classes, because they couldn't get other jobs, right? Because of Jim Crow. So like our teachers, our Black teachers, I'm not saying now, but like the teachers that were teachers is because they were like the best, right? So they were teaching their students all types of great things, even when they were under resourced, which is a right as a citizen. Okay? And then resistance, it goes back to, education for self-determination, establishment of independent schools, so they created their own schools, knowledge is power, literacy is a direct tool of freedom, and the political act of survival and resistance. So Al and Brown and Calderon talk about these periods as construction and the Reconstruction period. One of them was when African Americans were understood in society as the damaged individual to help sustain structural inequities. This is what I think it was Latin Billings talked about eugenics, when ability and success was seen from a biological perspective. Like there was actually like science studies studying brains of Black folks compared to other people and like justifying why they were here. So that was that period. And then Reconstruction period is the revisionist period of Black folks being like, no, these are our stories. This is what we know. These are our contributions. And we're going to tell our stories in our history, right? And you see that, let's skip that. You see that in these articles. Through the lens of both we love and what we don't learn about. They both offer some strategies. What were some of the strategies that they take? And what's your name? Chloe. Okay, I was like, what's your? Okay. Yeah, yeah.
I know when the like
Hmm? Yeah, role playing, giving students like specific instructions. Um, what strategy do you think is another one?
Use role playing process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so role playing is being used, right? And one of them is also role playing, learning how to do interviews and gather oral stories and history. And I think I like these two examples and how you saw them contextualized with the theme or the topic for the week because they highlight how you can approach and include oral stories and histories in your classroom. Doesn't matter what subject you teach, right? This teacher was a dance teacher, I believe. Um, yeah, anything that you found interesting.
I think that using role play, I think it's been explored in another article that we read, but using role play in the classroom, I think is really, it's a fun way to engage kids, and I think it really helps them understand, perspectives that they might not have considered before, or might have only experienced in textbooks, so it kind of gives them like, not necessarily a real life example, but it kind of helps put them into shoes that people that might have not otherwise experienced in life before. They might have kind of mythicalized in a way that,
Yeah.
you know, now you can see them as real life people. You consider what they were going through and why they chose to do what they did. I think it's really important.
Mhm. Any other thoughts? We all went back into the focus anymore. Okay. Well, yeah. Before about these, I think that for oral stories and history, you don't, you don't include them enough in our classrooms when we can. Strategy as a social responsible teacher is to create background knowledge. It's to get your students to connect to the big ideas you're going to start exploring. And one of them can be through oral stories. Okay? Maybe some of your parents have knowledge in construction. And maybe it's something that has been passed on like intergenerational, right? And that's a form of like math. Right? You know, a lot of things in math. And you can start from unit by talking about that and bringing the stories of those students in your class because you have that awareness about them, you got to know them. And then that's when you start teaching them. Are there any math majors here? Yes. You're teaching math? What are some, what is it, geometry could be?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but there's some good things to get that. And maybe that's how you start introducing your geometry unit, but first you engage with background knowledge that brings your students and makes it relatable or makes a connection to someone else. Right? I only say that because I feel like sometimes when we read on this history, it feels like very dense. Like, how much does teach on history in my class, right? I'm not even teaching this, teaching little preschoolers. I bring it up because it's important for you to have a consciousness of it, because then when you have that, you're able to make these decisions and like feel empowered to think critically about what you have to, you know, do in teaching. Okay. We're gonna skip. There's a bunch of quotes as you walk around. You can look at these quotes. Maybe next time we'll do it on by Black scholars, or intellectuals and people. Well, we can do that maybe next time. But I was gonna do a little gallery walk. Yeah, we can just do it next time. At some point. I don't want to skip it. But I don't think we even have time for this. What do we do for gallery? What do you guys want to do, journal or the gallery walk? Gallery walk, okay, cool. So for the gallery walk, I'm gonna give you a little part. You know, you can walk around and read the quotes. And then here are some questions to think about. So get up, stretch,
Yeah, that's like. Let's go.
That's in the 65, right?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, my guy?
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Are we writing the quote? No. So what's this for? Which quote did you like the best? I'm not reading them. It's just for you to write your little reflection. Oh. Or some bullet points. But go around reading them. Are there any quotes you disagree with? Why? This quote might be useful to communicate with people in your community about the importance of defending the freedom to learn. Don't focus so much on the questions, just go around reading them. And then once you've read a few, you're like, let me go back to this one and then think about that, the question. Or if you get called by one, just focus on that one, but yeah.
It wasn't.
I can't read that. No one ever. You're the one that put that. Oh.
Why did it hurt me?
I know it.
So you have to pick one. What one quote there is or that makes you think about something you've learned about, something you wanted to hear before. Yeah, the names are right there. No, but this was I just expressed them, but oh, it's the one by explaining. I think there's only one that I saw a reference to the same author, but. Do you know who Angela Davis is? Do you know who Angela Davis is? You know, okay, no, I'm saying, so people know, yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, everything's all right.
My bad, I'm sorry.
Are you, I hope, are you, yeah, yeah.
Real life enemy.
Was that here or somewhere else? Okay, but it was not for your teaching degree, it was, yeah. No, you don't have to copy on the phone. This is just for your like regular notes. Yeah, share it.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that-
I'm sorry, I'm trying to.
You can start making yourself, going back to your desk or your seat. Sorry, not good. It's on 15 minutes. I like this one myself. Oh, definitely. Is it best? I'm saying you have. Look, that I'm doing like that. If you haven't talked today, maybe this is an opportunity for you to share what quote you picked and like. I look one of you. One of these questions you thought about. Just. Yeah. I'll add some here. Take that the whole room there to me, but I learned.
One day when I was, one day I was breaking. And when I start, how to read, like maybe the guide of the school year. This one is really thankful. So that we have to read and now level. And then I mean like, we're gonna go to the like for now. I don't know how to read, um, myself. Second thing that I remember as a kid was that I don't have to read, I don't have to like basic and I reading, but I want like from more and more like I'm quite now.
What else who has to talk today? So the one that I like the best was now just only power, but it's I said like because if we don't talk and share our thoughts, it means that we have no conversation or debate because it's healthy, but for to more people who are. Yeah, right.
Very warm.
We did.
Yeah.
Where's that one?
I did too.
Okay, of course, it's short.
Well, no, not
Okay, it's meaningful, it's powerful. But you were to say a lot. That's true. Sorry about that. Take that back. Yeah, you gotta apply it, and then you're also probably gonna learn more as you're thinking. Someone else has a thought today? Yeah, Yes?
I picked the same boat.
Okay.
There's nothing else to say about it. What? But, no, I was always, taught the difference between like street smart and book smart. And growing up, I was, street- street smart. I always had problems with reading, I still do. And so like that, like really stuck out to me because like, it doesn't matter what knowledge it is, whether it be book smart or street smart. Um, it is power, knowledge is power. Gotta use it.
And you can be both street for and. You can be one or the other. Okay, anyone else? Wasn't top yet, and now we can go to the book. Okay. The history we've been talking about. Starting in the next month. Right. And so it's a push, but like I still push because you have to class like this, you have a class. But now it's have that class. Um, you know what the person was like, oh, but my college is so students and really represent. And I think the point you bring up is that, yeah, we can learn from each other. They feel observed, they feel equally compared. They also feel like they have something to believe and that they have knowledge that they gathered from their community, from their parents, and their grandparents, and their kids, that is valuable and can share. Not just the knowledge and textbooks, but also the story. Okay, so next week we meet here. Um, you don't have to submit and for a reading engagement. Study for your class, your exam. If you have questions, email me. If there are no office hours and you want to meet, email me. Let me know. Hold on. Let me know. Y'all are just like my students when I was teaching classes, young kids. But yeah, email me. We'll meet. If there are no more like time slots. Week 9 is spring break. We did make that note. Your critical reading is going to be due that Sunday night, but I will post stuff at the latest Friday. Okay, and yeah, just ignore this part, but return your nameplate. Look over here and have a great. I don't know. Yeah, so. That's what he's making it now, with like 5 to 7 like, I'm the top out. That's the reason why. What's the, like. One hundred. I don't think.